Well, it's a delight to be here, and it's just to thank the organisers, for inviting me. I think you will hear a difference between Philip's presentation and my own, because I'll be emphasising the importance of the non-verbal, so I think you'll hear me much slower in terms of the communication of my meanings. The other point is that as I look at you, the actual formation of the room denies the kind of educational values I hold, because it's this idea of the sage on the stage, do you know, that rather than a guide on the side. So I look at the back, and all I see is a blue. I can't see your eyes, I can't see your facial expressions. So the very context is, if you like, denying some of the educational values that I'm hoping that I can share with you. Now, I was very impressed with the documentation that I was given for the conference. It really is superb. The Moffet Institute as well has done a really good job in getting its material together. Now, what I just want to stress with you is, if you look at the Moffet Institute and the writing channel, this is what it says. And we're celebrating here, I know, 30 years of the existence of the Moffet Institute. It says, the range of writing frameworks aims to encourage teacher educators to transform their personal, theoretical and practical knowledge into public knowledge that is available to the community of educators. Now, I want to focus on that because what I'll be wanting to suggest is that the very texts that we often use, such as this one that I've just been to the symposium or seminar on teacher educators as members of an evolving profession, and it's edited by Mariam Ben-Baratz, and there was a really great group of people talking about it. Now, if you go into texts such as this, you will find that they're literally all print-based. So, if you want to be academics, literally in the world today, you have to produce publishable works in international referee journals. And as Philip was talking, I was thinking, now if that was just transcribed, it could be put into an international referee journal. Because the language is all, in my terms, lexical. Words are defined in terms of other words. Now, if you take, for example, what Michael Connolly has been working on for years with Jean Van Dillen in relation to narrative, I think you'll find that the kind of questions that everybody in the room knows that they are asking of themselves are actually very different to the topics that, for example, are in our program. That you would be able to open your program at any point at any page, and you will find that apart from about 3, which had, for example, one had the title I Believe, the other had the title What Am I Doing Here? And I sometimes feel that about myself, what am I doing here? That not one of the inquiries was of the form, how do I improve what I'm doing? Now, in 1967, when I started my teaching, I just produced a special study for my teacher education program, my initial one, which was called The Way to Professionalism in Education. So I feel that over those 40-odd years, I have been evolving my own professionalism. So there's no doubt in my mind, when I look back at my early work in the classroom, for my academic work, that my professionalism, my sense of professionalism, is continuously evolving. But I go right back to my first lesson, where I was teaching science in the East End of London, and I felt my first lesson was a disaster. I'd come out of the middle class, and again, white education. I was talking science to my students, and Ecclesiastian terms, it was all at the formal level, and it took me several months to recognise that I was missing the students. But that first lesson was a disaster. I went home and thought, I have to do this better. Those were the words and it was actually a feeling of tension, enormous tension. I have to do this better. The question was, well, how do I do this better? How do I improve my practice? Now, I have researched that question over the last 40-odd years, and I hope to be able to show you, in relation to the resources that I brought for you as gifts from the web, what it means for practitioners to bring that question, how do I improve my practice, into the academy, which can be legitimated for doctoral degrees. Because when I went to the University of Bath in 1973, I went to the university because the academics I had been learning with at the Institute of Education, they were the main philosophers of the time, called Richard Peters and Paul Hurst. They had a view of educational theory that was made up of the philosophy, psychology, sociology, and history of education. So often it was talking about in terms of the disciplines of education. Now, it took me about 5 years to recognize they were making a fundamental mistake. There was me teaching in the East End of London all the time, trying to improve my practice. How do I do this better? Can I explain the influence I'm having with my students? All the philosophers and the psychologists and the sociologists and historians were interested in was, could I demonstrate my grasp of philosophy or psychology or sociology or history? Nobody was interested in whether I had any evidence that I was influencing the learning of my students in an educational way. Now that for me is, it is really fundamental. Now what I just want to show you here is that if you go into my website, and this is actionresearch.net, actionresearch.net, you will find the gift of many living theory theses. I'll explain what I mean by this in a moment, but by going into actionresearch.net, you can just download all of these doctoral theses, and I've supervised most of these myself over the last 17 years. There are about 34 of them of my own supervisions, and then there are others from around the world. And you'll see that most of them have got the I in the question. How am I generating a living theory of environmental activism? How do I evolve? How can I reconceptualize? So the I is not the egotistical I. I always stress the importance of Martin Buber's work in my work, because as a Jewish theologian, it had this beautiful poetic work, you'll know it, the I thou, which was the relationship with his God. But I've always, as a humanist, taken the I-you relationship. So when I say, how do I improve my practice, I hope you can hear that it is a relational I. That even though I can't see you at the back, actually you are energizing me because I am here in the presence of passionate educators. And I hope that the I that you hear is the one that Martin Buber says we should be using, and not the egotistical I. So the idea that you can place in your inquiries, how do I improve my practice? And you can bring your values. And this is where I love what what Philip has actually talked about in terms of Hurley's sparks in his earlier work. When we talk about the revitalization, if you like, of the secular, I don't have any religious commitment, but I do think that I have a passionate spiritual commitment to a life-affirming energy that I bring into my educational relationships. Now, if I look here, I just want to stress that this is an electronic portal. I'm not using it in the way that I know I can use it. For example, I could put up my slides for the presentation. They could be like this, so you could actually read it. I could say that education researchers, and I make a big distinction between education researchers and educational researchers. It might seem a small difference, but it is major. Because education researchers produce explanations within the disciplines of education and the fields of education. And I would include, certainly, after microscope, the notions of curriculum within this notion of the education researcher. Now, I also have this notion of an educational researcher. And I have these debates in both the UK and America about the British Educational Research Association and the American Educational Research Association, because as I attend these conferences, they are mainly made up of education researchers. And in my terms, we have few educational researchers who are producing valid explanations for the educational influences in learning of individuals, in their own learning, in the learning of others, and in the learning of the social formations in which they live, work, and research. So that is the big distinction that I would make, and I agree with Philip in the need for a real social movement to actually transform what counts as educational knowledge. I think the Moffet Institute, if it's going to be working on its writing channel, And this is where it's so exciting for me to see that point about bringing the embodied knowledge, and it's really a great statement there, personal, theoretical and practical knowledge into public knowledge. Now, how do you do that in a way that remains true to your embodied knowledge as educators? Well, one of the difficulties is that we're used to using just words. If you look at the international referee journals, you'll find most of them are just print-based texts. If you want to remain true to yourselves, what I'm suggesting is that you might need to start to use the visual media. Now, I want to point out, by slowing down the communication and turning the sound off, how important the non-verbal communications actually are. Now, I've done quite a bit of work in China, and it was at Ningxia Teachers University that hosts China's Experimental Center for Educational Action Research in foreign languages teaching. And this is a former student of mine, Moira Laidlaw, who is a professor for life at that university. She now lectures at the university. Now, what Moira is doing here, and I turned my video camera off, she went to the door, and I was lucky that I just turned the video camera on. Now, this is one of the transformatory nature of the digital revolution. The digital technology enables me not only to show you a video, but to do this. I can move over an hour or whatever it is in seconds. Now, I want to focus on something that Robert Sardello calls empathetic resonance. Now, for me, this resonance is communicated through the relational dynamic. You've got 84 students in this classroom in China, passing through the door. Here is Moira, just at the end of the lesson. Now, I want you just to concentrate on the non-verbal communications. Now, when I see Moira's response to those students, the eye contact, the actual delight she showed. And again, this was normal for Moira because I supervised her doctorate while she was in Bath, and I was inspired to see the quality of the relational dynamic she had with her students. Her examination results were very good indeed, but there was something about this quality of relationship that I felt was very significant for the students. Now, she calls over one student here who had actually resisted something Moira wanted to do, and in China that's very rare. Moira is congratulating that student on having the courage to actually respond in a way that other students felt very embarrassed about, because it was a question, it was a challenge. My point is that even as you see me now, I hope you can sense a certain kind of energy which I'm expressing with you. That this is actually evoked because I'm with a group of passionate educators. If you want to explain my educational influence with my students, or over that 40-odd years of engagement in education, you cannot ignore those non-verbal communications with that energy and the value and the passion I hope, and I would say a love for education, that comes into what it is I do as I'm with you now, and I'm also with my students. But I don't think that you will actually just be able to communicate it with lines of printed text. Now, I hope that I'm being clear about this, because I had to work at the University of Bath quite hard to change the regulations about the submission of research degrees. And in Israel, I still think you may have this dominance of the printed text. In 2004, a group of us were charged by the Senate of the university to make recommendations about the submission of research degrees. We made a recommendation that from 2004, students could submit e-media within their theses. So it wasn't just as an appendix, it was actually as part of the main body of the work. They could bring in this kind of data, the data where you're showing what you do in practice, and that you could actually analyze. And this is where, again, Philip's importance of analysis. It's not just description, it is analysis. And you could bring the non-verbal with the visual into your research degrees to explain the nature of your influence. And if you go into these doctorates, you will see that they bring Yvonne Grotti. I didn't supervise this, it's from Ireland. She's one of the foremost researchers in e-technologies, How am I bringing an educationally entrepreneurial spirit into higher education? If you can click on any of these and you can access the contents. Now, I just want you to know that all of this is being made available by the people as gifts. They've all given these embodied expressions of meaning, and that's what the Moffet Institute is committed to, which is make the knowledge public. And it's not only descriptive, it is explanatory. Each of these doctorates has got to engage in a way I think Philip and others would recognize as demonstrating scholarly critical inquiry. And I always bring in the critical theorist Jürgen Habermas in relation to his notions of communication and the evolution of society in relation to the validation of each of these living theory theses. And I want you to really, if you like, recognize this difference between the traditional theory and what I call a living theory. Now again, I'll use the traditional kinds of communication, I don't have any problems with those, where I want to communicate something in relation to, if you like, the transmission mode or a didactic mode that you've seen me doing it here. Now I've got one that just allows me to say what a living, in my judgment, a living educational theory is literally your explanation for your educational influence in your own learning, not only your own learning, but in the learning of others. And this is the crucial thing, in the learning of the social formations in which you live and work. So I think this enables you to integrate what it is that Philip was talking about in relation to this notion of social formations, bringing in critical theory, and examining your own influence, not only in your own learning and the learning of others, but also in the learning of the social formation in which you're present. I hope I'm making sense here, because the idea of a learning of a social formation is why we change the regulations of the university to allow the submission of these kinds of inquiries. Now that is an example for me of having an educational influence in the learning of a social formation. In 1991, we managed to change the regulations of the university again, because until 91, you could not challenge under any circumstances the judgment of an examiner. Once an examiner was appointed by Senate, the judgment could not be questioned. In 91, we actually, in many UK universities, there was an issue of human rights involved here, and we got the regulations changed so that you could question an examiner's judgment on the grounds of bias, prejudice, and inadequate assessment. Now, there is another illustration of what I'm meaning by the education of a social formation. But for me to, if you like, feel that I might have an influence with you, I'm hoping that if we look at a program, for example, the 7th International Conference, that some of you will place your own eye within your inquiry. And you will be looking at what it is you're doing from your own professional practice to live your values as fully as you can within your context. So that question, how do I improve my practice? It seems to me, I think all of you will be asking yourselves every day something about making something better. And that's why I just want to again just focus on where you can go for these gifts. Everybody here, this is all made available to you through a $200 computer in my study. Okay, it's not sophisticated. This has been running since I left the University of Bath in 2009, so it's been running for 4 years non-stop. I took all the material from the university server, put it on this little computer in my study at home, and it's all connected to the internet, so you can access it freely. Everybody here on this website has given their work as a gift. It's not coming in a colonizing sense. It's actually saying, look, we've spent a minimum of 5 years for these doctorates inquiring into our practice with values that we think carry hope for the future of humanity. Now, can we leave these as a living legacy for others to see if they can find them useful? And they've all said to me, Jack, you can have this as a gift. I've supervised, as I say, most of them. Please make them available around the world and globally so others can see. Is that, how many minutes is that? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now, that resource, as I say, is just available for you. to access freely as long as you can remember the actionresearch.net. Now, what I always do, if I'm giving a keynote at an international conference, is literally the day before I leave the UK, I put my notes for the keynote on the website so they can be accessed by everyone. And so this idea of the What's News section here, you'll find the notes for this keynote can be accessed from that What's News section. And in it, you'll see that I'm referring to Philip's work, you'll see how I acknowledge Michael's work on narrative, and you'll be able to connect with me and contact me if you have any questions and issues that you want to raise with me, because my email is on that. Well, it's not only in the program, which I find very helpful, but it's also on my website. So what I hope and I can encourage you to do is to look carefully at the program, because everything for the conference has been superbly organized. And then look, just open the pages, any page, and look at the title. And I think you'll see that they're all offered in the traditional academic form of a conceptual abstraction. That nobody has actually, within their title, included the fact that they're studying themselves in terms of improving their practice. And yet I think everybody here will recognize that that is a vital part of what you're all doing. And in particular, most of you, I think, have got what I call a life-affirming energy. You wouldn't keep doing what you're doing without that life-affirming energy. Now, I hope you're feeling and sensing that I'm expressing that here because I'm in your presence. But you've also got values which are unique to you. You've got a context which is unique to you. And this enables you to make fundamental and original contributions to knowledge, which can bring in what Philip was saying, because I want to end with that real importance of doing something that Habermas stressed when he said, look, make sure that your explanations are valid. And he had 4 criteria. He said, ask people to help you to make your accounts more comprehensible. He said, make sure you've got sufficient evidence to back up the claims you're making. Now the third one, no positivist researcher needs to ask or answer. And Habermas said, make sure you understand what he called the normative background from within which you're writing. And by that, you can bring in the socio-historical and socio-cultural influences on your writing and practice. And in Israel, you have this amazing history with cultural influences. You could not make sense, I think, of what you're doing educationally without bringing that influence in. And this is where Habermas's notion is critical theory, and this idea of the validity, the social validity of what we're doing is crucial. But his 4th criteria, I think everybody here will like, and it is to do with authenticity. I think everybody here, if you are authentic to your values, you will show yourselves living your values as fully as you can over time and interaction in your research. And I'd just like to leave you with that idea that by engaging in this kind of inquiry and placing your own eye, and remember the Weberian eye is the IU eye, it's a relational eye. It relates to that sense of humanity. Then I think that we will, as a social movement that Philip wants to see, be very, very influential in the future. But many thanks indeed for having me here. Thank you.